Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If you boil it down to its most basic components, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, was just a buddy cop movie. Except instead of being cops, Anakin and Obi-Wan are Jedi, which means they didn't volunteer for the job, they were kidnapped or taken from their parents at a very young age. Okay, never mind, it's nothing like a buddy cop movie. The point I'm trying to make is that Star Wars is full of awesome pairings. The Master and Apprentice mode of operating seems to be something Force users really like. After all, I'm sure having superpowers is really confusing, and it takes a lot of mentoring for an individual to completely control their powers. I'm actually surprised in a galaxy like Star Wars where the Force does exist, more people aren't running around doing stupid things like showing off their skills on HoloTube or robbing liquor stores with the Force, or both at the same time. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to be looking at the 4 best Jedi and Sith pairings in Star Wars history, and at the end of this video, you guys will be able to vote in a poll in the top right corner which one you think is the best.
Master Yoda, Master Dooku was just telling us a tale of when he was your Padawan. Really quite a humorous story.
Actually, it's kind of a sad story. Dooku becomes obsessed with some forbidden Jedi prophecies, then he becomes disillusioned with how the Jedi Order was running things, and then finally he leaves the Jedi Order. But he waited a little too long because by the time he left the Jedi, he was already past his prime. It's like Stephon Marbury leaving the NBA for the China League. But before Dooku turned into an old man and was in his prime, he was probably one of the most formidable Jedi in the Order. He was the only Jedi duelist who could defeat Mace Windu and even Yoda in a one-on-one. Dooku was an incredibly talented swordsman who would master all of the forms. But Form 2 was where he was most comfortable. This was the form designed specially for dueling other lightsaber-wielding individuals. Not the most practical form, but really good for someone who likes hunting down other Force users. From a young age, Dooku also excelled at telekinesis. As a youngling, he won a Force skills competition that was designed for much older Jedi. Dooku was definitely a 1%er when it came to skill and power. But in this pairing, he was just the Padawan, selected and trained by Grandmaster Yoda himself, something that surprised the rest of the Order. You see, members of the High Council usually weren't supposed to recruit a Padawan, because serving the Council was already a full-time job. Yoda also hadn't had a Padawan in quite some time, but he definitely was up to something when he selected Dooku. Maybe he knew I was going to make this list on YouTube, and he really wanted to solidify his place on this list. Aside from his almost 1,000 years of experience, his connection to the Force was legendary. He was on that 5G 1 terabyte a second next level Super Saiyan Jedi goodness. As a leader of the Order, he tried to maintain the orthodoxy of the Jedi, but as an individual, he oftentimes thought outside the box and even broke the Order's rules. In many ways, Yoda existed outside the rules because the rules were usually for lesser Jedi. If you take a look at the Jedi Order, the most talented members were usually more than willing to bend the Jedi Code to complete a mission, whether that was Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn, or even Anakin. It was only the less skilled Jedi Masters like Master Luminara that adhered directly to every word that was spoken by the Council. Aside from his incredible power in the Force, Master Yoda was also one of the most powerful duelists in the Jedi Order. 1,000 years of experience gave him plenty of time to master all the different lightsaber forms. But Yoda, like Dooku, preferred one form over the rest, Form 4 Ataru. This was an incredibly acrobatic and stylish form of lightsaber combat, and it helped Yoda make up for his tiny size and short little stubby limbs. When employing Form 4, Yoda was basically a tiny ball of plasma slicing and dicing everywhere. Not only was he incredibly hard to hit, he could also do a ton of damage. And he did this all with a healthy amount of Force abilities. With Dooku as his Padawan, the two were basically unstoppable.
Well done, Revan. I was certain the defenses of the Star Forge would destroy you. But I see there is more of your own self in you than I expected.
There's something different about the Old Republic era. Everything feels a bit more epic and a bit less polished. Perhaps that's because the Jedi and Sith at the time were more evenly matched, and that produced huge battles that tore the galaxy apart. Perhaps one of the most turbulent times in Star Wars history was roughly 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. This was during the brutal Mandalorian War. The warrior faction had secretly been pushed into invading the Republic by the Sith Emperor. The Mandalorians were an unstoppable force, and the Republic worlds began falling one by one, until a young Jedi Knight named Revan finally led a faction of Jedi into the war against the Mandalorians. At the time, the Jedi were mainly just peacekeepers. They didn't serve as generals or soldiers for the Republic. Revan, who was both charismatic and skilled on the battlefield, would go on to change that perception. With the Jedi backing them, the Republic was able to turn the tide against the Mandalorian onslaught. But all of that death and war hardened Revan, and before he knew it, he had massacred hundreds of thousands of soldiers, many of them his own, during the terrible Battle of Malachor V. After the war ended, Revan would continue seeking enemies in the outer rim of the galaxy, and he brought along his friend Alec. Although not quite as strong as Revan, Alec was loyal, and his bond with Revan was strong. And when Revan turned into a Sith, Alec turned into Darth Malak. And together they returned to the Republic from the Sith Empire at the head of a giant Sith armada and waged war against the worlds they once protected. What made Revan one of the most formidable Force users of all time was the fact that he could tap into both the dark side and light side of the Force. His experiences as a Jedi, then a Sith, and then kind of as a Grey Jedi gave him skills on par with the ancient Jedi. These were individuals who found balance in the Force within themselves and were arguably much more powerful than the more dogmatic Jedi and chaotic Sith. Light side powers were generally really good at protecting and regenerating an individual, whereas dark side powers were great for destruction. Wielding both, Revan was unstoppable. At the same time, he was considered one of the best swordsmen of all time and a terror on the battlefield. But perhaps the most impressive thing about Revan was his willpower. Through all of his trials and tribulations, he never really lost touch with his true self. That's how he was able to come back from the extremes of the dark side, something that was incredibly hard to do. Although Malak was never at Revan's level, he became an expert Sith in his own way. Unlike the Sith during the Rule of Two era, the Sith from Malak's time had still not lost their ancient knowledge. Malak had access to all sorts of crazy Sith powers and was a practitioner of the now lost art of Sith sorcery.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness!
Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, a tragic friendship that was forged in death and ended in death. This pairing had the potential to be one of the most powerful in the history of Star Wars, but was unfortunately cut short, because Anakin let a woman get in between the two of them, or wasn't an old man with a scrotum face. Anyway, Obi-Wan Kenobi was perhaps one of the most underrated Jedi the galaxy had ever seen. He was never the most skilled or most powerful Jedi, but he probably had one of the purest hearts in the Order. A lot of individuals are destined to join the dark side. Some are destined to become great Jedi, but very few have the right temperament to be the perfect Jedi. Obi-Wan Kenobi fell into this latter category. He was the kind of Jedi who never really needed the code to stay on the straight and narrow. He was always well-disciplined, compassionate, and perhaps most importantly, patient. The man waited in the desert for 2 decades watching over a moisture farmer, and he used Form 3, the defensive form, to outlast some of the greatest duelists in the galaxy like Asajj Ventress, Darth Maul, General Grievous, and eventually even Anakin. Obi-Wan Kenobi is proof that greatness is not just born, it can be gained through hard work and dedication. Anakin was the exact opposite of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He ran on fire and passion. His connection to the Force was even stronger than Yoda's, his midichlorian count unprecedented. Obi-Wan Kenobi's teachings tempered Anakin, and the bond between the two was like that of brothers. Yet it was very apparent, even when Anakin was just a Padawan, that he was more gifted and skilled than his master. But speed and power didn't always translate into Anakin doing better than his master, something that Obi-Wan Kenobi always tried to teach Anakin. Anakin complemented Obi-Wan's defensive Form 3 with a more aggressive Form 4. It took aspects from Form 3 and added aggressive strikes to the combination. Anakin would go on to be the most feared duelist in the galaxy as Darth Vader, but that was after he lost almost all of his limbs. It's a shame that happened because as Darth Vader, Anakin's body was so damaged that he was never able to reach his full potential.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Every Jedi and Sith pairing on this list has had a profound effect on the galaxy, but very few of these pairings had as much power and control as Darth Plagueis and his apprentice Darth Sidious. From the shadows, these two brilliant Sith Lords would slowly erode the Republic's economy and democracy from within the system. This was the path of least resistance that had been started with Darth Bane's Rule of Two. What made Darth Plagueis and Sidious so different from former Sith was their ability to control and mask who they actually were. Darth Plagueis was immune, a part of a wealthy and powerful family associated with the intergalactic banking clan. Throughout his life, Darth Plagueis increased his control over the IGBC and also started his own lobbying firm, Damask Holdings, through which he controlled the rest of the galaxy through a variety of different financial interests. He carefully shaped a crisis in the Outer Rim which destabilized the Republic, which ultimately led to his protege Sidious, a master statesman and charismatic leader, to take the position of Chancellor of the Republic. The Jedi never saw this coming, and by the time they did, it was already way too late. Aside from their incredible political and financial power, Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis were able to do things that no other Sith pairing was ever able to do. Whereas the Jedi sought to be one with the Force and unified with the energy, the Sith sought to dominate the Force and bend it to their will. Plagueis and Sidious, with their combined powers, eventually figured out how to create life and cheat death with the Force, giving them almost godlike powers and potentially even immortality. Unfortunately, Sidious was always a bit less rational than Plagueis and ends up killing his master, ending the spectacular duo's partnership. I think it's really interesting that if you look at these four incredibly powerful pairings, that almost all of them end up trying to kill each other, whether they are Jedi or Sith. I guess that's the price you pay for greatness. You gotta be ambitious to reach the top. Also in the top right corner is our poll where you can determine which of these pairings you think is the best. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.